There are two key questions to consider. In what ways can World War II be considered a total war, and why did the Axis powers lose World War II? World War II was even more deadly than World War I. More soldiers and civilians were killed than in any war before it. The impact on civilians in particular in terms of death, destruction, and displacement also made it more of a total war than that of 1914 to 1918. It was also very different to previous wars in that it was a conflict of rapid movement, with major campaigns taking place not only in Central and Western Europe, but also in the Far East, North Africa, and the USSR. In the early hours of September 1st, 1939, Hitler's Panzer tanks, supported by the Luftwaffe, or Air Force, smashed over the border into Poland. They rapidly cut through Poland's defenses, thus making a path for the advancing infantry. This rapid and devastating method of fighting was known as Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. Polish resistance was heroic, but ultimately futile. The USSR invaded from the east, as agreed by the Nazi-Soviet pact, and on September 29th, Poland was divided between the two countries. After the defeat of Poland, very little happened in the next 5 months. Although Britain had declared war on Germany 2 days after the Polish invasion, it could not get troops to Poland in time to have any effect, and thus only watched as great part of Eastern Europe fell into the hands of Hitler and Stalin. The Soviet Union took over Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and then invaded Finland in what became known as the Winter War. Meanwhile, the French manned the Maginot Line and waited for the next German move. Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, believed that this period of inactivity would bring Hitler to his knees, and that Hitler had, in fact, missed the bus. In the Winter War, the Soviet forces were vastly superior in numbers to those of the Finnish army, 450,000 troops against only 180,000. However, the Red Army had recently been subjected to the political purge that had removed 50% of its commanding officers. This weakening, along with the determination and high morale of the Finns, meant that the Finns were able to hold out until March 1940. Although victory did eventually come to the USSR, the fact that the Soviet losses were so large meant that it was also a humiliation to Stalin. 4 days after Chamberlain's misguided comment of Hitler missed the bus, Hitler invaded Denmark and Norway. Control of Norway was important for the Germans due to the need for German access to Swedish iron ore, which was vital to the German armament industry. The invasions brought about the downfall of Chamberlain in Britain, and on May 10th, a coalition government was established under Winston Churchill. Also on May 10th, Hitler launched attacks on Holland and Belgium, and then, skirting around the tip of the Maginot Line, invaded France on May 12th. The reason that the Maginot Line defenses did not continue along the frontier between France and Belgium was because Marshal Pétain believed that the Ardennes forest further north would be strong enough barrier to stop Germany attacking from that direction. However, this is exactly where the Germans broke through. Using blitzkrieg tactics, Hitler's victories were swift, and within 6 days the panzers had reached the English Channel. Only Dunkirk remained in British hands, and 1/3 of 1 million troops were then rescued by the British Navy and other private boats owned by fishermen. Although a great opportunity to boost British morale with talk of the Dunkirk spirit, the evacuation was in fact a serious blow for the Allies. They lost large amounts of arms and equipment and had been driven from the European mainland. The Germans now swept southwards. Paris was captured on June 14th, and the French government, now led by General Pétain, requested Germany's terms for an armistice. The ceasefire agreement was signed on June 21st in the same railway coach that had been used for the 1918 armistice. All of the country except southeastern France was occupied and demilitarized, thus giving Germans access to important submarine bases on the Atlantic coast. Unoccupied France was allowed its own government under Marshal Pétain, but in reality it had no real independence and actively collaborated with the Germans. Hitler's Germany had achieved more in 2 months than the Kaiser's Germany had achieved in the whole of World War I. By the end of June 1940, Germany dominated Western, Central, and Northern Europe. In addition, Italy had now entered the war as Hitler's ally, and the USSR remained friends with Germany in the East under the terms of the Nazi-Soviet Pact. Franco and Spain did not actually join in the war, but remained closely associated with Germany and Italy. Britain now stood alone against Germany. On June 18, 1940, Churchill correctly forecast the next stage of the war. He said, "The Battle of France is over. I expect that the Battle of Britain is about to begin." Hitler had in fact hoped for a peace agreement with Great Britain rather than an invasion, yet Churchill was totally opposed to any negotiation with Hitler and went on to inspire the British with determination and memorable speeches. Churchill said in a speech to the House of Commons on June 18, 1940, "The whole fury and might of the enemy must very soon be turned on us. Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be free, and the life of the world may move forward into broad, sunlit uplands. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age, made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of a perverted science. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, 'This was our finest hour.'" Hitler remained astonished that the British would continue to resist. Although an amphibious invasion codenamed Operation Sea Lion was planned, it was given a low priority as it was believed that the Luftwaffe would be able to destroy the Royal Air Force. With no air force to oppose it, the Luftwaffe would be able to dominate the Royal Navy in the English Channel, leaving Britain totally exposed to German invasion and so willing to come to the negotiation table. Thus the Battle of Britain began in July 1940, the Luftwaffe opening their offensive with a concentrated air attack on Britain's airfields in order to gain air supremacy. The Luftwaffe then started bombing London and other major cities in what became known as the Blitz, in an attempt to break British morale and destroy her major industries. When it became clear that Germany was unable to break the RAF or Britain's morale, Hitler postponed the invasion indefinitely. Then, in 1941, he turned his attention to his main priority, the conquest of the Soviet Union. There are several reasons why Britain was able to survive. The numerical superiority of the Luftwaffe, about 1,200 bombers and 1,000 fighters to the RAF's 900 fighters, was offset by the fact that German bombers were vulnerable once their short-range fighter escorts had turned for home, and they had limited range and a limited bomb load. The German Bf-109 was an excellent fighter, but also had only enough fuel to stay in the air for about 10 to 20 minutes over Britain. Against this, the British Spitfires and Hurricanes were excellent fighters and could spend much longer in the air, being over their home airfields. Britain had also a revolutionary new warning system called the radar. This minimized the impact of the RAF's numerical inferiority, as it allowed the RAF to locate the incoming enemy and not have to waste aircraft in patrols looking for German planes. Hitler's switch to bombing the cities instead of concentrating on RAF airfields was a fatal error. By this changing of tactics, the RAF was given time to recover and to rebuild air bases. The Battle of Britain was the first time that Hitler had been stopped from achieving his aims. Britain's survival was going to be vital for keeping up the pressure on Germany and ultimately to providing the launch pad for the Allied invasion of Europe in 1944. The entry of Italy into the conflict in June 1940 spread the war to the Balkans, the Mediterranean, and North Africa. In September 1940, Mussolini sent an army from the Italian colony of Libya to Egypt. Another Italian army invaded Greece from Albania in October. Both Italian offensives failed, however. The British pushed the Italians out of Egypt, and then the British sunk half the Italian fleet in the harbor at Taranto and occupied Crete. The Greeks forced the Italians back and invaded Albania. Mussolini's failures brought Hitler into both North Africa and the Balkans. General Erwin Rommel and his African Corps soldiers were sent to Tripoli, from where the British were driven out of Libya. By June 1942, the Germans had advanced close to Al Alamein in Egypt. Meanwhile, in April 1941, Hitler's troops overran Yugoslavia and Greece. Within 3 weeks, the Greeks had surrendered, and in May, Crete was taken over by a successful airborne attack. The British evacuated in May 1941. These campaigns were significant for several reasons. First, they were a severe setback for the Allies. Also, British troops in North Africa were moved to fighting in Greece, which weakened the British in North Africa at a time when Britain needed its strength to deal with the threat from Rommel. In going to assist Mussolini in Greece, Hitler's plan to attack the USSR was delayed by a crucial 6 weeks, which had an impact on the chances of the German army reaching Moscow before the harsh Russian winter set in. In conclusion, Britain was still on its own. Yet, after the German conquest in mainland Europe, Britain also became the base for a number of European governments in exile. In 1940, the governments of Poland, Norway, and the Netherlands were established in London. There were also other bodies representing Belgium, Luxembourg, and Free France. Armed forces of these countries, like Polish fighter pilots, also took part in the defense of Great Britain.